Hello, this is Don Mitchell. Welcome back to the 2000% Nation. Today we'll be moving into Chapter 2, which is entitled What Government Should and Should Not Do. And let me give you some quotes from the Bible that will sort of, I think, help frame the discussion. First is from Isaiah chapter 9, verses 6 through 7 in the New King James Version. For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government will be upon his shoulder, and his name will be called Wonderful, Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and peace there will be no end, upon the throne of David and over his kingdom, to order it and establish it with judgment and justice, from that time forward, even forever. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will perform this. Now, let me by contrast, I'll look at the warnings that Samuel gave to the people of Israel in 1 Samuel chapter 8, verses 10 through 22. So Samuel told all the words of the Lord to the people who asked him for a king. And he said, This will be the behavior of the king who will reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them for his own chariots and to be his own horsemen. And some will run before his chariots. He will appoint captains over his thousands and captains over his fifties. He will set some to plow his ground and reap his harvest, and some to make his weapons of war and equipment for his chariots. He will take your daughters to be perfumers, cooks, and bakers. He will take the best of your fields, your vineyards, and your olive groves, and give them to his servants. He will take a tenth of your grain in your vintage, and he will give it to his officers and servants. And he will take your male servants, your female servants, your finest young men and your donkeys, and put them to his work. He will take a tenth of your sheep, and you will be his servants. And you will cry out in that day, because your king, whom you have chosen for yourselves, and the Lord will not hear you in that day. Nevertheless, the people refused to obey the voice of Samuel, and they said, No, but we will have a king over us, that we may be like all the other nations, and then our king may judge us and go out before us and fight our battles. And Samuel heard all the words of the people, and he repeated them in the hearing of the Lord. So the Lord said to Samuel, Heed their voice, and make them a king. So finally, let's look at 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 13 through 14. Therefore submit yourselves in every ordinance of man for the Lord's sake, whether to the king as supreme or to governors, as to those who are sent by him for the punishment of evildoers and for the praise of those who do good. So as 1 Peter chapter 13 and 14 tell us, Christians are to submit to man-made laws as well as to those who enforce them. God has placed government leaders above us for his purposes, and our job is to obey them. In some cases, these leaders are Christians. In other cases, the leaders aren't Christians, but the Lord intends for them to serve his purposes anyway. As an example, consider that providing or receiving a government service or being affected by government can help guide an unsaved person onto a path to gain salvation and then become more fruitful for the Lord. Before describing what government should and should not do for fostering more fruitfulness for the Lord, let's consider some worthy influences on governments. Such influences represent potential sources of stalls, bad thinking habits, as well as breakthrough solutions for godly purposes and actions that help improve fruitfulness. Although most people are inclined to emphasize the accomplishments of the leaders they approve of, the reality is that few government leaders have much time and expertise to apply to anything other than acquiring and exercising power. If you don't believe that observation, consider how much money an American politician has to attract simply to run for national or statewide office. Once elected, many leaders report spending most of their days on fundraising to pay for the next campaign. In addition, few elected positions have term limits, and incumbents for positions where seniority provides advantages for constituents are almost always reelected. As a result of being secure in office just as long as they spend a fortune on each campaign, elected officials don't feel much pressure to create better results of any sort. That's how it works for a Republican or Democratic form of government. In countries with unelected governments, gaining and holding power can easily become all-consuming activities. The 2011 revolts in the Middle East and North Africa have undoubtedly made such leaders even more insecure and focused on retaining their power. Elected government officials in most countries are more likely to be trained as lawyers than to come from any other educational and work background. While such a background can be useful for drafting laws, the legal perspective alone doesn't provide much insight into how to make a nation more fruitful for God. I feel entitled to make the observation of someone who's trained as a lawyer, who knows many lawyers well who have held and now hold elected positions. Let's look at motivation as well. Why would any governmental leader have an interest in making a nation more fruitful? The most common answer is simple. One such fruitfulness helps the government leaders to acquire and exercise more power for accomplishing whatever led them to seek office. Of course, some governmental leaders are guided by a heartfelt desire as followers of Jesus to serve God and his people. Those leaders may well be attracted to create a great many increases in increased fruitfulness, knowing that many unsaved people would be helped as well. I pray there will be more such leaders. What can elected governmental leaders hope to accomplish while in office? People who want to be governmental leaders and those who are relatively new in office usually make promises that will deliver more for the electorate. In reality, whether citizens' circumstances improve is mostly affected in the near term by the overall economic environment and the general long-term trend in slightly higher productivity. As a result, there is a likelihood of economic and social improvements occurring regardless of who the political leaders are. But over periods of 2 to 6 years, the long-term improvement trend can be reversed so that citizens' circumstances worsen or stay stagnant. After such a stagnant or retrograde period, the rate of economic improvement is going to be strong, and most political leaders know that. Therefore, they will often take a wait-and-see attitude towards change at such times. However, there are two circumstances under which it may be easier to interest governmental leaders in focusing more on encouraging fruitfulness. First, at the end of a long period of economic improvements, because the expectation is that a decline in circumstances will follow. And second, after a stagnant or retrograde period in economic growth, the expected rebound doesn't occur on schedule. This perspective summarizes the outlook for gaining political attention for supporting growth and fruitfulness in economically advanced countries. In lesser developed countries, governmental leaders may realize that by focusing citizens on the right tasks, a great many economic and social gaps between their country and the most economically advanced nations can be reduced or in some cases eliminated. With such a focus, the potential benefits from working at greater fruitfulness can be extraordinary for citizens as well as for their leaders. In addition, some lesser developed countries have been racked by many decades of wars, disease, famine, low prices for their exports, weak currencies that raise the cost of imports, corruption, excess debt, scarce capital, high interest rates compared to inflation, poor education, few public services, limited infrastructures, and other severe problems. Everyone knows that these nations are performing economically and socially at artificially low levels compared to other countries with comparable resources and knowledge. Some governmental leaders in such unusually depressed circumstances see the opportunity to gain a revered place in their society and in history, and some of these leaders are in fact Christians. I believe it is with these government leaders that the most substantial opportunities can be found for encouraging national fruitfulness. In this chapter, I focus many of my comments on what can be done with such leaders in mind. I focus on this group of leaders. I don't mean to suggest that other government leaders won't be interested in encouraging fruitfulness. I also don't believe that the largest possibilities for improvement are found in the most depressed, lesser developed nations with very legacy and reputation-oriented leaders. The biggest untapped potential resource to accomplish our fruitfulness will be found elsewhere, simply because improving from a larger base of resources and capabilities expands total benefits much faster than building from low performance. Let me be clear about my purpose. I'm looking for this book to help most where leaders are interested in encouraging fruitfulness and opportunities are substantial. In more developed countries, governments will be among the least flexible and interested in institutions when it comes to identifying, creating, and expanding fruitfulness. In lesser developed countries, governmental leaders will often be anxious to do whatever it takes to accomplish more because it's easier to believe that opportunities exist, and the wide evidence of suffering can move leaders to act. One exception to there being less interest in encouraging fruitfulness in economic developed countries can occur where the career bureaucracies are filled with highly capable staffs that have power to issue rules that can strongly affect citizens' behaviors. Another exception may come in economically advanced Christian countries where the lessons of becoming more fruitful and serving God are understood, but there's a long tradition of not taking government actions that might appear to favor one faith over another. So at this point, I'm going to leave you, and I encourage you to come back because as I continue to discuss Chapter 2, we'll next look very specifically at what government should and should not do. And these, in fact, turn out to be very limited in nature. And I'm sure you'll find it fascinating. But in the meantime, may God bless you, your family, and all you do in the name of Jesus. Goodbye for now. Take care.